time trying to come up with a poster frame expression for this review. I didn't want to represent the movie as being like good. It has its moments though, and that's why I didn't want to also seem like I was hating on it. So I hope you like what I came up with. And I thought you'd get a kick out of seeing some of my options that I thought of. All right, so Disney's Snow White, this new one, is actually less of a live-action adaptation of the 1937 classic, and it's more of a live-action adaptation of 2023's Wish. Now, I know hardly anyone saw Wish, but if you saw Wish, and then you see this movie, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. It's actually kind of weird how similar they are. The hero and villain have a very similar dynamic. Well, I don't want to give anything away. I'm going to do a spoiler review tomorrow. And Rachel Zegler's signature song is Waiting on a Wish, and Ariana DeBose's was This Wish. Plus, the town square of Snow White's kingdom looks identical to the one in Wish. Identical! Both films also have a very strong made-by-committee feel to them. And then, as you might recall, Wish, well, or maybe you don't, because again, nobody saw this movie, but Wish came out for the 100th anniversary of Disney Animation Studios. So to celebrate, instead of making a good movie, they decided to reference, I mean, it was watchable, as I would say this one is. Not the first 20 minutes. I'm getting ahead of myself. But anyway, they referenced a number of Disney animated classics, just like this new Snow White does. They've got elements here from Tangled, Frozen, Sleeping Beauty, and as I said, Wish, all rolled into this film. So that it feels very little like the 1937 classic. Occasionally like, oh yeah, I see it in there. And I would say that's an odd choice because to date, the Disney live action adaptations that have done the best are the ones that are, you know, faithful to the source material. They add like layers of depth and nuance to it and they add to them, but they're still at their core the properties that everyone loved so much, which is what they're trading off of. What's more, this Snow White doesn't even feel like a movie. It instead feels like a very elaborate theme park stage show with Rachel Zegler and Gal Gadot playing to the cheap seats. Ironically, the one actor here who started out on the stage, Andrew Burnap, comes across as the most cinematic. But did I like it? All right, I think I got my David S. Pumpkins on there for a minute. All right, so well, after the first 20 minutes or so, which were painful to sit through, my goodness, so bad, the first 20 minutes of this movie. I would have just lopped them off the film. It didn't need it. But once Snow White runs away to the enchanted forest, I felt the movie picked up. It has some really nice moments, stunning production design and costume design. I would say two actually great musical numbers. And also I think the film has some really wonderful and important messaging. I love the messages in this movie, in fact. Some I can discuss, I'll get into them a little bit here, but I'm afraid for the most part, I can't really dig into the messages until the spoiler review. Because there are a lot of twists here. Now, sometimes when I criticize a film, people in the comments will say, well, why don't you make a movie, Grace? Well, here's the thing. Do you think Hollywood is really going out of its way to hire talented people these days? I mean, there are talented writers and directors in Hollywood for sure, and trying to break into Hollywood, but they don't seem to be getting hired. We're at a point where I would say almost anyone in the audience can do a better job than what the studio is handing in, and can see where all the flaws are. I mean, that's one of the things that takes you out of these recent films. And not just from Disney. You're like, wow, I can see right here as I watch it that was a mistake. Don't you screen these things to studio executives? Don't you read these scripts before they go into production? I really was like, I wish I had my red pen. I just remember now. All right, so I blame not only a lack of interest in hiring genuine talent. Studios often hire friends or clients of agents that they have relationships with or who they're told, but rarely is, the next big thing. And I also think that there's a real fear these days from executives to take a stand and say, this stinks, turn in better work or I'm going to find someone who can. And this isn't just a Hollywood problem. I think this is something that many businesses and many areas of society are dealing with, where everybody seems to be playing a giant game of hot potato and nobody wants to be it. Whatever happened to the days of the buck stops here? All right, so back to the Snow White movie. So there's some good, as I said, there's some good stuff here. When the movie is actually doing an adaptation of Snow White, it's at its strongest. And as I said, it has two, not just good, but great musical numbers. Snow White's Whistle While You Work, I actually almost applauded during that, after that sequence. I was like, oh, and then I remembered how bad the first 20 minutes were. But that was very, very strong. And then the evil queens, All Is Fair. Now, don't get me wrong, Gal Gadot is truly awful in this film, and we'll discuss that in a little more in a moment. But this was a good song. Particularly, not so much because of Gal Gadot. She didn't ruin it. But they had a lot of choreography around her from all the castle workers. And it reminded me actually a little bit of Be Our Guest. It was shorter than that song, I think. But the sequence worked. I was like, that's actually pretty good. Now, to be clear, The Greatest Showman, also from Pasek and Paul, this is not. But those two musical numbers were very good. Then, as I said, I really love the production design. While Snow White's castle and kingdom were super bland, very generic fairy tale. It almost seemed like that was a choice that they made. They're like, what if there was, like you would think that maybe when the queen was in charge, yes, the kingdom was devoid of happiness, so it was very washed out. But it looked that way at the beginning of the movie. It was not good. But the enchanted forest, the dwarves' cottage, what a cottage. I was like, it looked almost like a little bit like a mini resort. And also their diamond mine. Absolutely stunning, gorgeous to look at. Now, I wouldn't describe them as wedding cake, but very Thomas Kincaid, which I thought was a great approach. I'm wearing my Snow White style shirt for the review. All right, so the only thing keeping the forest and cottage from being perfect was that you could clearly tell you're on a soundstage. It's a bit like watching The Mandalorian and being able to spot the limitations of the volume. You're like, well, I see the edge. I see it. Snow White's outfit, though. Oh, that gets its own section because it was absolutely gorgeous. The dress and the red ballet style flats. Oh, wow. It just really pops in the forest. And the way that gossamer skirt, so many layers. The way it moved, it was just pure fairy tale. She looked fantastic. So often they'd have like a wide shot of Snow White frolicking in the enchanted forest. And I was like, damn, that looks good. Now, I would say the messages of the film are not only good, but they're my favorite part of the film. We'll get into them again, as I said, in depth in the spoiler review, but I want to touch on them lightly here because it's pretty much the main reason to go see the movie. The overall message is not just that real beauty is within, but kindness versus selfishness. I wonder if this is what came from Greta Gerwig, because it's very strong. She had like first pass at the script, but I think it went through like 8 writers, and you can tell. All right, so the movie could have done a lot more with this. This was really good setup. So the evil queen is set up as someone who believes in the golden rule. But in this case, it's who has the jewels that makes the rules. And I wish they'd actually use that line. That's fantastic. And the evil queen has had to fight her whole life. And because of that, she's very competitive and aggressive. And being fairest of them all is just one part of that. And she's just unwilling to give an inch. But then that's contrasted with Snow White, who was born a princess. And she has lived a charmed life, but her parents taught her to share the good things in her life and her kingdom with her people. And Snow White not only believes in kindness, but in fairness as well. I liked that quite a bit. It was a very simplistic view of the world, but I thought it was a good starting point for little kids. Speaking of being a princess, I also really like that the film focuses on the fact that instead of marrying a prince, which of course would be nice, any relationship for the princess would be wonderful. But the real goal of a princess in that regard is that someday she will or should become queen. It always has bothered me since Frozen, when I gave the first Frozen a bad review, that these fairy tale movies have just completely ignored what a ruler of a kingdom really does. I'm like, it's just not an excuse to wear a nice dress and sing a song. And so the fact that that element was here a little bit, I thought was really nice. It was really nice. And we'll talk about it again more in the in the spoiler review. And also, they make some big changes to Dopey. And this has been something that I've seen a couple of people talk about. In fact, I had it spoiled for me. Somebody was like, how dare they do this? But I was shocked when I heard it. I was like, that does sound awful. But then when I saw it in the context of the film and I thought about it, I was like, why would they do that? I actually thought it was a good idea. I think it's a really nice lesson a beautiful lesson for a lot of children to see, and maybe even some adults. I can't explain it. We'll talk about it in the spoiler review some more. All right, now let's talk about Rachel Zegler. So, without a doubt, she has a beautiful singing voice, and even with this awful hairstyle, I was like, why don't you at least move the part? The evil queen did that to her. I was like, you don't have to lean into it, Snow White. But she's gorgeous. She's very beautiful. And when the forest animals, the fairy tale cartoonish forest animals, are following her around and she's frolicking in her dress and she's singing her songs, she looks every inch a Disney princess. However, she has the same problem that Keira Knightley had back in the day, also for Disney, interestingly enough, and that's she is voguing. I would say that Zegler's movements come across as very stilted and planned. You know, she seems very much like she's playing Snow White and is aware that she's in this movie and she's Snow White, rather than simply becoming Snow White. So it's a very big difference. And as I said, it's the same problem that Keira Knightley had. Zegler is finding a lot of success on the stage, and I think that might actually be a better place for her, as one of you suggested the other day in a live stream. I just don't think she's a natural enough actress for film. But at least she can act, which is more than I can say for Gal Gadot. Okay, so how bad was it? Oh, well, let's just say that my showing of Snow White, one of the first for the general public, because I missed the press screening, that's why my review is late, but it was pretty much empty. But there were still enough people there to laugh at Gal Gadot's line readings, particularly towards the beginning of the film. And not like, they weren't laughing with Gal Gadot. They were like, oh my God, it's even worse than I thought it would be. And it was really awful. I'm surprised that they were, maybe that's the best she could do. But if I were her director, I'd be like, Gal, for your own sake, we're just gonna keep doing it. I don't care how many times it takes. We're gonna keep doing it till we get a usable one. Whew. All right, so I think that there is an irony of having Gadot play the evil queen, because that's a woman obsessed with beauty. And here's Gadot, where that's the only thing that she brings to the role. She can't act, she can't sing, she even has trouble just standing there. She is truly awful in the role. When you think about how many divas in Hollywood could have knocked this one out of the park, it is so disappointing that they cast Gadot in the role. And then also that they gave her a richer backstory and this great personal mantra and viewpoint to be queen here. I mean, it's just, this could have been actually, I think, a fabulous role with a different actress. As I said, Andrew Burnap comes from the stage. I actually saw him recently in Camelot at Lincoln Center. Aaron Sorkin had rewritten the book for it, and he was fantastic. He was very good, and I was very excited that he was cast in this film. You know, they don't call up a lot of actors, you know, from the stage to go into film. They all go to Agatha all along, you know, and I hope to see more of Andrew Burnap. He did a really nice job. And also the Gilded Age. A lot of theater actors on the Gilded Age, but not so many in big movies. And he makes a good case for more actors getting the call to film. He has genuine chemistry with Zegler. I mean, he's playing Flynn Rider, not any character from Snow White, but that's not his fault. His Jonathan also feels very modern, but in a good way. He's probably the most modern feeling character that I've seen in a Disney project in a I think maybe even to some degree ever. He felt very modern. He's also a very organic actor. You know, as I said, you know, usually you would think the actor who couldn't do subtle would be the stage actor because they're used to, you don't have that closeness that the camera brings. But he made Jonathan feel very real and fleshed out. The only thing that felt forced was that they insisted on his character wearing a hoodie, and he seemed a little too old for a hoodie. And it's a fairy tale movie, and he's like, yeah, I got my hoodie. And then even in the end, when everyone switches into like their all white end of the movie outfit, they gave him an all white hoodie, like Jonathan wouldn't be caught dead in anything but a hoodie. Speaking of wardrobe, I wonder if anybody else noticed this. He's also wearing some very tight felt pants that leave very little to the imagination, and a very short shirt. I'm also getting some evil queen Snow White vibes here behind me. I don't know if you're catching any of the lightning there, but that's kind of neat and apropos. All right, so how about the dwarfs? Big mistake to go CGI, which we all knew as soon as we saw them. We were like, whew, that was a mistake. And it is. The animation on them is not bad. Doc, Grumpy, and Dopey make the strongest impressions, and every once in a while you're like, I guess that's like okay. But even though the movie is called, well, it's not called Snow White, but the original was called, it's not called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs now, but originally it was called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and that's the story it was based on. But in this movie, they feel shoehorned into their own film, which is maybe why they're not in the title anymore. Plus, the film has 2 groups of 7, 2. These dwarves and now Jonathan's band of thieves. And it's silly. It's silly. We can't talk about it until the spoiler review because I don't want to give the few little things away. But it was ridiculous. I just have to say, Jonathan's group seemed a little bit like a band of thieves that was also an improv group. And as someone who's been in improv groups and around improv groups, I found that both ridiculous and hilarious. All right, so the diamond mine, though, their diamond mine is gorgeous, as you would expect a diamond mine to be. But then they have these mine cars doing roller coaster moves. And I was like, are you trying to sell me on a roller coaster? And then I was like, oh yeah, wait, you have a roller coaster. I don't love that roller coaster. It's in the Magic Kingdom in Florida, and they just don't have enough space for a roller coaster. So it's like a ridiculously short ride, and it always has a ridiculously long line. But it just feels like it comes out of nowhere and means nothing. It just seems like an eye-rolling corporate mandated ad for that roller coaster that they have. It's like, again, it's not like the Indiana Jones Temple of Doom sequence where it's really important to the movie. They're just like, remember, we have a roller coaster. And they never explain why the dwarves are even mining diamonds and what they do with all of them and what this has to do with the kingdom at large. At the very beginning of the movie, there are a lot of jewels around the kingdom, and then the queen takes them all for herself and I guess wears them. But then they never really talk about it too much after that. It's not really a point of conversation. And also, I don't understand, since the dwarves seem to have like an seemingly endless supply of jewels, why don't they just flood the kingdom with jewels? And I'm like, here's some more. I guess I could just make them because what really gives the value to them besides them being beautiful, but any monetary value, right? This could have been a really great element of the story, but they just totally drop it. They also seem to suggest that the dwarves are like magically creating the jewels and the diamonds, and then they dig them out. But again, they just never bothered to explain any of it. All right, I thought the movie actually ended on a very nice note, though. So nice that I thought to myself, you know what? All little kids should see this at some point, especially little girls. I was like, there was just one little moment at the end, and I'll talk about it in the spoiler review, where I was like, that was really nice. As for adults, well, could you get through Wish? If you could get through Wish, you could get through this movie. Now, if you do go to see this film and you're trying to sit through those first 20 minutes of crap and you're like, why did Grace say this was okay to see? Just remember, I warned you that you got to get through that 20 minutes of crap and then the good stuff comes after. Well, again, there's a lot of bad stuff still, but anything worth seeing in the film is after that. All right, so that is my non-spoiler review of Snow White. Spoiler review tomorrow. Share your thoughts down below. Subscribe today. And of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.